He needed a bell.
Keep an eye on Johnson. That's a good plan.
Good morning. Would people, would members please assemble?
So you just pulled Rush's name, okay.
Not T. Tom coming back.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Good morning.
Good morning, Eric. Just fine, thank you.
Yeah.
Nice dinner.
It was good. I had fish. Did you have fish?
Oh, yeah, salmon.
I really enjoyed that dinner last night.
Very good.
My companion,
A long time to catch those, though.
quite interesting
Yeah,
gal, and
Yeah, right.
sat with
Good morning. We'll call to order the meeting
and
Governance Policy Committee this morning. I know that we're still expecting Regent Lucas. And we have several absences of our colleagues this morning, but everyone else is here. So we will call together the committee. We have 3 items up on the agenda, as well as some informational matters. This will include a potential approval of the reservation delegation of authority policy. We'll also be reviewing the board operations and agenda guidelines updates. And then third, we will be having a conversation about the board transparency and public engagement. That'll be a discussion item. I've asked Executive Director Steves to assist me in the presentation, and obviously I've been working closely with Chair Rocha on the development of the agenda and the items that you are seeing in the reports. So let's start with the first item, again, reservation delegation of authority. I've been Chair Rocha and I have had several in-person meetings and a number of phone conversations that have included our staff and the administration. And I thought I'd just sort of list out the principles around those about establishing thresholds and under the reservation delegation of authority. And that includes ensuring the appropriate oversight and striking a balance between control and delegation. Second, aligning our thresholds for consistency. We've chosen to use a dollar amount that we think is appropriate. Third, a byproduct of this is really creating simplicity through standardization, simplicity for staff, simplicity for the board in all the thresholds. So we've attempted to do that. Some of the thresholds we're proposing to lower, some we're proposing to raise, one we're proposing to eliminate. On balance, it's a slight, modest tightening of thresholds. And we've recognized through the course of the project that that we don't have that many transactions that hit these thresholds, and we also know that the process we have about putting transactions on the consent agenda creates a fairly efficient flow of business. So we concluded that we don't think that the process of approval of is burdensome in general. We can process transactions same month for the most part, but it also reserves the board the right to pull something out of consent and have a conversation about it with the full board. So with that background, I will turn this first item over to Executive Director Steves to walk us through this line by line.
Great. Well, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you so much. I think if we can put the slide up, I'll just put up a graphic to show you. You may remember this slide, which showed the current thresholds that are outlined in this policy. And then I'll just put up a graphic that I'll leave up there while we walk through the changes in the policy, because this graphic represents what is proposed in the packet for action today. All right, so I'll walk through the policy, and if you want to follow along, I'll try and call out the section and subdivision as I walk through it. In Section 1, Subdivision 6, this is what we've been calling the umbrella language, or the umbrella that sits over kind of all the other thresholds. This language is updated in a couple of ways. One is that it articulates that the umbrella applies to authorities that have been delegated to the President, and it specifies where those authorities are in the policy. Previously, it was pretty vague in terms of what exactly this umbrella applied to. So that has been articulated, and then in addition to the triggers that had previously been there around unusual questions of public interest or public policy or significant impact on the university's mission, a third item has been added, which is issues that pose a significant financial risk to the university. That then in turn allows for the remainder of that section to be deleted, which had carried with it the $2 million threshold. Part of the confusion around the umbrella language had been when and how that $2 million threshold would kick in, and so by making this umbrella clearer and more articulate and deleting that $2 million, it makes it much more operational. In that same section in Subdivision 7, there is a new provision that's added related to reports to the state of Minnesota, required reports to the state. This was discussed actually in the context of board operations and agenda guidelines, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but it seemed more appropriate in this policy. And that is that the board would reserve to itself authority to approve and submit reports to the state if they impact the university's autonomy or they address performance of the university and its major initiatives. Other reports would be provided to the board, but not subject to board approval. And so you might wonder, what would be some examples of those? Well, the accountability report would be a good example of one that reports on the university's performance, its major initiatives. One related to autonomy. The legislature has, for the past couple or maybe 3 biennia, included some performance metrics that are tied to a certain portion of the appropriation, and the university has to report on its progress against those metrics. That would be a report that would trigger the autonomy question in this subdivision. Moving on to Section 4, Appointment Authority. You've seen this language previously in Subdivision 1. It articulates that in addition to approval of individually negotiated employment agreements, that any significant amendments thereto would also be subject to board approval. This has been, this may not seem unusual, in part because probably for the past year or so, that is exactly what, by agreement, the administration has been doing and bringing those forward. So that would be included there. In Subdivision 1, item D, you'll see that it now reads Division 1 Director of Intercollegiate Athletics. That is intentionally written that way to include both the Twin Cities and Duluth campuses' athletic directors. Then down in item I, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, as noted previously, that is correcting a gap that was previously identified by the administration, wherein we have the board approving deans, for instance, on the Duluth campus, but not the Vice Chancellor that those deans report to. So that fills that gap. Moving on to Section 5. This is some cleanup language in Subdivision 4 that simply deletes a duplicate threshold that was listed here, and then just cross-references this policy with the commercialization of intellectual property rights policy. So the threshold does not change. It just ensures that we don't have the same threshold outlined in 2 places, which is something we're trying to avoid in policies because they have a tendency to get out of line with one another if we have that. Skipping ahead to Section 8, this is where the thresholds are primarily articulated, and so I'll walk through those. In Subdivision 1, the current threshold for purchase or sale of real property was 1.25 million or larger than 10 acres. The proposed language reduces that threshold, the dollar threshold, to $1 million, adds a secondary requirement that if the property is located within 2 miles of a university campus and continues to have the 10 acres. So in other words, it now becomes a three-part item. Any one of those 3 parts can trigger the board approval requirement. So if it's larger than 10 acres, if it's greater than $1 million, or if it's within 2 miles of a campus, all of those would be subject to board approval. Subdivision 2 relates to real property easements, leases, and arrangements of that sort. That would decrease from 1.25 million to 1 million. In Subdivision 6, the multi-year capital plans, that remains at $1 million, but it has some additional language saying that if there are projects that are anticipated to have a budget greater than $1 million, but a budget has not been, our cost estimate has not yet been established, that those should be included. That is consistent with the current administrative practice to list projects without dollar amounts. This simply codifies that is a continuing expectation. Subdivision 7 and 8 relate to capital budgets and capital budget amendments. In both cases, the current threshold of $500,000 would increase to $1 million. Subdivision 9 relates to schematic plan approval, and it eliminates a 4-part set of requirements related to schematic plans, and simply says that the board reserves the authority to approve schematic plans or significant amendments thereto for any projects or amendments with a value greater than $1 million. Now, I know there was a question that maybe had come up about projects that are over $1 million, but for which there are no schematic plans, maybe a roof replacement or something. Those would certainly be outside of this. This is intending for when there are schematic plans for a project, that's when it would trigger this. Subdivision 10, which required something called final project approval, is eliminated. This is recognizing the fact that the board would have had multiple touch points with the project prior to that point in time, and there was just a sense on the part of committee leadership that this final project review was redundant. Moving on to Section 11, Employment and Labor Agreements. There is in Subdivision 3, language is eliminated that would require or that would establish a $250,000 threshold for board approval of retirement plan changes. Instead, any retirement plan change would now be required to come to the board. This was proposed by the administration and continues to be in this draft. So there would be no threshold related to that. All changes would come to the board. Subdivision 4, this relates to appointment authority, something that I know this committee and the board has had a lot of discussion about. This language, I think, is very responsive to the previous feedback that this committee and the board conversations have yielded. What it says is that the board reserves to itself authority to approve individually negotiated employment agreements or amendments thereto when they have a value of $1 million or more, and then articulates that for purposes of this subdivision, the total value means the potential amount due to the employee if the university terminated the employment agreement without cause. So, in other words, if an employment agreement were signed and then the very next day the university decided to terminate that employment agreement without cause, the dollar amount due to that employee is how you would calculate whether this provision were triggered. If it's $1 million or more, then this would be triggered. If it's less than $1 million, then this would not be triggered. It then goes on to talk about faculty positions as defined by the board's policy on faculty tenure, and indicates that this subdivision applies if the faculty member's first year compensation is set at more than $1 million, or when there are individually negotiated terms of employment that create a potential amount due to the faculty member of more than $1 million if the faculty member's appointment were terminated. So that is how appointment authority is outlined in this policy. or this proposal. And that concludes the changes that are outlined in this policy.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. You have in front of you, therefore, a marked up proposed amendment to this Board of Regents policy, reservation delegation of authority, and I'll open it up for questions or comments at this point. Regent Johnson. I'm sorry, Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. Just a couple thoughts. I'm grateful, and the board is grateful for what's been an extensive amount of work on behalf of our board leadership team, Mr. Steves and his team, you as Vice Chair and Chair Rocha, to arrive at what I think is, first of all, a comprehensive approach to an important matter of governance. I think it's incredibly thoughtful, and I think it strikes the right balance between effective governance and efficient management. It's not an easy balance point to find. The board has wrestled with this for what I think 7 meetings, perhaps, including my first, infamous 6-6 vote. And I'm pleased that you've reached this. I'm sure there's pieces of this that management might not find perfect, and there's probably pieces of it that any individual member of the board might not find perfect, but that's part of balancing things. So I'm supportive, and I'm ready to go forward and support it. And Chair Beeson, thank you for what's been a lot of work.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Other questions or comments? Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. I rarely echo comments, but I agree. This has been a lot of work, and it's time. I'm ready to move the motion, or move for a motion. Whenever you're ready to call for it, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Regent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too want to echo the fact that we have put a lot of work on this. We've come close a lot of times. I think this product is better than what we would have had the last time had it been approved. I do want to just clarify or get some clarification on. So the original intent of this was to make sure that we approved the high-dollar contracts, and I think it's covered in multiple places, but I just want to make sure that it that we all understand kind of where it's covered. You kind of talked about a lot of things in your intro, but could you just review for me where exactly those places are for the high-dollar contracts?
Mr. Steves.
Mr. Chair, Regent Roche, or Regent Hsu, I'm sorry. The appointment authority is outlined in 2 places. One, in Section 4, appointment authority, it articulates or outlines how the board will interact with certain named positions. What you're referring to as high-dollar contracts would probably be then subject to Section 11, the Employment and Labor Relations Subdivision 4 language.
Okay, so in terms of faculty, how many faculty members are we hiring that are in the over $1 million range in the first year and have termination clauses that would have us pay out more than $1 million? Is that just kind of a threshold, or do we actually have those cases for faculty?
Mr. Steves.
Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu, I'm not. We did not ask HR to run an assessment of that. So
okay, so it may not kick in for 50 years or something, right? So, all right, I'm supportive of this. I appreciate all the work that's been done.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. Other comments? This does have the support of the administration. I don't know if Mr. Burnett or the President wants to weigh in on this matter further.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do realize the board's desire to do this, and while it obviously creates more work and slows things down, we will do what you ask us to do.
Okay, we will, we can ask for a motion.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Second. That's a motion, and we'll take that as a second. Is there any further discussion? Not hearing it. Well, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, let's go to the second item, Mr. Steves, this regarding board guidelines and board operations and agenda guidelines.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. The committee has been engaged for a number of months in an incremental or kind of systematic review of the board operations and agenda guidelines policy. And this is now your first opportunity to look at the policy in totality with all of the red line changes that have been incorporated all together at once. And so today this is up for review, and I'll walk through the changes so that you can understand what's outlined here and then ask any questions you have, and then it would return to the committee at a future meeting for action. I'll skip over places where really there are housekeeping or formatting or cleanup types of language. You'll see that throughout, but I won't spend time on that. So the first item I'll touch on is Section 3, the fundamental planning documents, which are outlined in Subdivision 2. There is a new paragraph outlined here which relates to system-wide strategic plan. It creates this as an expectation for a fundamental planning document. And what you'll see is that previously the language in the University Plan Performance and Accountability Report really did suggest that it would function both as a forward-looking strategic plan and a review of performance in the past. It really has focused much more heavily on the reviewing performance in the past, or kind of a look back, and not as much on a look forward. So what this does is simply splits that out. It takes that language out of the University Plan Performance Accountability Report, creates a new section related to system-wide strategic plan, creates that as an expectation, and then makes some minor adjustments to the accountability report section. In both places, the university progress card is articulated as an element of those items. And I'll just note that this is not intended to be the system-wide strategic plan that is currently being discussed by this board and the administration. The intent here is to say, at any point in time, the board expects that there would be a document. It might be titled something different or whatever, but it would function in this way. It would be a strategic plan that would be in place to guide and frame things like budget conversations. Moving on in this same section, there was a single paragraph that outlined the university budget, both operating and capital. The proposed language simply separates those two and does some cleanup on the language related to those. So it has one paragraph related to the annual operating budget, a different paragraph related to the capital budget, which is much more consistent with the way this board actually interacts with those two documents. You don't interact with them in one giant budget. You interact with them separately. There is a subdivision, or there's a section D there, which simply creates a cross-reference to the report submitted to the state of Minnesota provision that we just talked about in reservation delegation of authority. Moving on into section 4, committees of the board. Again, there's some cleanup language there. And then as we get into Subdivision 3, you'll see, or actually now numbered Subdivision 4, you'll see the Audit Committee, Audit and Compliance Committee charter. And there had been some discussion about this previously in the committee. And what has been done here is not only is the charter title continuing on in this policy, but all the guts, so to speak, of that charter are brought over into this policy. And so this really is different than what is outlined for the other committees. It stands kind of on its own, and will continue to provide the the kind of special status that the chief auditor was seeking in terms of this committee. I won't go through the specific language for each committee because you had an opportunity to look at that specific language kind of one by one as they came through your dockets, but I'm happy to answer questions as you may have. Subdivision 5 articulates the Finance and Operations Committee charge. You'll see here where the formatting comes in, where it talks about the committee specifically recommends certain things, and the committee provides oversight of certain things. And that is a format that you'll see running through the other charges as well. Subdivision 6 is the Governance and Policy Committee, and I almost can never go by the Governance and Policy Committee without noting the fact that this committee will partly have a charge to help guide the board to articulate a clear vision for the university, to clarify reserved and delegated authorities, which is something you were just working on previous to this, establish institutional benchmarks and performance metrics, and thoughtfully consider risks. And those are really some of the hallmarks of an effective governing board. And so this committee will continue to try and drive the board toward those activities. And I'm jumping ahead here. There's a lot of red line, but it is simply deleting existing language in favor of the new language. Subdivision 7, the Litigation Review Committee, adds a cross-reference to specific policies rather than a vague cross-reference to board policy generally. Subdivision 8 is the Mission Fulfillment Committee. You've seen that, and some changes were incorporated based on board feedback on that. In Section 5, Meetings of the Board, this is where the committee, both the committee structure and the number of times each committee meets, now has been updated to reflect the changes that you've made in your committee structure. In Subdivision 3, Meeting Procedures, this one adds some new language, which under the review category, this is the one where it talks about review or review action at various meetings. And the new language says, under review, if an item is listed on the agenda for review, any board member may request that an item listed for review become a review action item. If there is no objection from other members of the board, the item is voted on in that meeting. The fundamental planning documents, as described previously, would be exempt from this provision. So in other words, you would never take an operating budget and move it from review to review action in a single meeting. But there are a number of other items that could potentially have that if there's no objection and the board wants to move forward. The Subdivision 5 talks about senior leader committee liaisons and notes who those are for each committee. And then below that, in that same subdivision, it talks about the role that committee coordinators play from the board staff for each committee. That is simply reflecting basically what happens today versus what the language had previously said. Subdivision 7. It retitles emergency approvals as urgent approvals, and provides some additional language to indicate when those would be appropriate. So those are for when delay for board approval could have a significant impact on the university's mission or pose a considerable health, safety, or financial risk. So some of that is new language, as you can see in the red line. It then also talks about urgent approvals shall be used judiciously, and any approvals will be reported to the board or respective committee within 5 days of the approval. So this gets at the feedback that the committee had when it was discussed previously. In Section 6, board meeting agendas, there have been some updates to reflect really how the agenda process has changed over time. The board is much more engaged on the front end of agenda development, so that has been built in so that those touch points are happening prior to Agenda 1, and then board leadership is really engaged in finalizing at Agenda 2. So I know that's kind of a quick breeze through that policy, but that's the gist of what's outlined here, and we're happy to take questions or additional comments so that we can get this into shape to bring back to you for action.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. And this committee next meets in June, so this would...
May.
Oh, in May, rather.
Not May, yeah. June. Oh, June. Good.
That's June. So we do have some time, obviously, between now and then to finalize it. Thank you for all the work with this. It's I think it's a good update and cleans up a lot of language and lines our resolutions with the policy. I'll open this up for questions or comments. Regent Hsu.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Beeson. So if I'm to understand the emergency approval change, this can be used, so basically it takes 3 board members, the chair, the vice chair, and committee chair to basically approve something that otherwise would be approved by the board in a regular meeting. So,
Mr. Steves.
Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu, yes. Within the parameters outlined in this subdivision, yes.
So in the previous topic, what was it, the delegation or reservation delegation of authority. So any of those could be overruled by or approved by this approval. And I guess my question is, it's a little vague in terms of when you can use this. And I think it could be too easy to use this in certain situations.
Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu, this is partly why some additional language talking about the need to use it judiciously and trying to establish some language that sets a high bar for this has been included here. Historically, this has not been used frequently, and I wouldn't anticipate that its frequency would increase with this language. This is really intended to allow business to move forward in situations where delay for a board meeting would jeopardize a project or jeopardize the ability to move forward on something significant that the university was trying to advance.
Follow up, Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Steves, there's also the ability to have an emergency board meeting, correct? So when would this be used over that?
Mr. Steves.
Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu, that would really fall to the discretion of the board chair. The board chair has the ability to call special board meetings or emergency board meetings. Emergency and special and regular are all defined in the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, and so each of them have different notice periods, but it would really be the board chair that would be able to make that determination or allow an approval to move through with this language.
Okay, I have some concerns about this. We can talk about it a little bit more offline, but I just want to make sure that there's a proper use and improper use, and that we're not basically usurping the responsibility of the board by having just a few members make decisions on behalf of the board.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. Regent Svigum.
Mr. Chairman, Regent Hsu, I'm trying to read through this and the changes, and while the wordsmithing is different, the intent is not different at all from current policy, is it?
I'm sorry?
Is the intent, the wordsmithing is different, but is the intent any different from current policy?
Well, I don't know. I think at some, well, you were here for the discussion before. I think some of us had some different thoughts about how the actual interpretation of the previous text of the policy was to be interpreted. So I don't know. I'm just concerned that there's things that happen every day here, and we tend to find out about it at various points in time after the fact. And I would just hate to have things that can't be undone approved and then the information given to the rest of us at some point in time in the future.
Well, Mr. Chairman, maybe I could ask
Regents Figgum.
We could ask Mr. Steves, with the change in wordsmithing, you changed some words around, but is there any significant change in this urgent approval than from current policy is? I mean, I would assume that we have to have, for some serious health, safety risk that takes place, we got to have an ability for the president to immediately get a decision without getting 12 of us together. I don't even know if it ever happens, but
It just happened last week.
Mr. Steves, and you might
is
also
there a
address
significant change here that I should be aware of?
This has been an infrequent practice.
It has been.
In my opinion, we can...
Infrequent.
Infrequent.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
But
Sorry.
it does happen. I mean, we just had one last week.
And we can,
Right.
I think we've quantified how many times this provision's been instituted, but it's rare.
Mr. Chair and Regent Swigum, it is rare, maybe a few times a year, maybe 2, 3. I mean, it's maybe one. It depends on the year. We look back over, I think last time I had the data, we looked back over 2 or 3 years, and we had found 8 of them, I think. So it is infrequent. This language is not intended to substantially change this provision in any way. The real significant change is that previously there was no requirement that it be reported out to the rest of the board, and now within 5 days that would have to be reported out so that all of you are aware that an emergency approval took place.
So if I'm correct in the way I read the cross-outs and the new lines and the new reds and the underlines, I think the intent is the same. The only enhancement is more transparency for board members quicker than previously.
Yes.
Regional Mari.
Thank you, Regent Chair Beeson. Well, I mean, it sounds like Regent Shu's concern was previous to the changes and consisting of the new changes. Is that fair?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So it's not about a substantive change, which I actually I understand where you're coming from. I'm not concerned about our use of this provision now. I do hear what you're saying, that it could become problematic. At the same time, I tend to err on the side of us making good judgment on who's leading the board and making good judgment on the hiring and expectations of the CEO of our organization, who's sitting to my right. So I share your concern, but also recognize that we as a board put our leaders, chair and vice chair, who also have or chair at least, who have a say in this as well. But I would look forward to any thoughts that you have on how we can amend or come up with a better process if there is one.
Thank you, Regional Mari. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. I think it's always important to look at any change to get the historical context. Where were we? Where are we going? And what actually changed here? And at a high level, what I think is an improvement is the use of the word judicious written right into it, and that we have timely reporting out when this not often used tool is used. And to the extent it helps, both I can maybe speak for Vice Chair Powell, that we have no intention of making this a widely or readily used tool. This is used with great caution and with very rarely. Typically in a commercial context, when we have short-term contracts coming, and then just like the last one we did a couple weeks ago, it is fully cancelable. I think it was after 3 months, so we're not going to surprise anybody on the board with a new 10-year contract that you just read about and never approve. So just for the extent that helps. But judicious, timely reporting to the full board, to me, are the improvements here.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. You'll note Regent Roche and I suggested changing emergency to urgent. We thought that was a better descriptor of what typically would fall under this section. Regent Spigham?
Mr. Chairman, just looking at it, it sure seems appropriate to me, and that it's probably necessary at times. I do have a question about letting every other committee member know or the board know within 5 days. It just seems to me with nowadays technology, it could be within 1 day. I'd be surprised if you can't let us know right away. But I don't know why anybody would want to wait 5 days. But
Thank you. We'll take that under advisement as well.
not a big deal, Mr. Chairman. It just seems like
All the comments are noted. No, that's what this review process is intended to accomplish. Other comments on this?
Mr. Chairman.
Regent Dean Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Hsu, I'm curious with importance of your comment about board information and leadership and all that. I'm not challenging. I just wanted to hear more from you about that. Typically in organizations, as you always would say, the buck has to stop someplace, but at the same time, I think good leadership would find a vetting of the decision or information with other people, and then ultimately a decision is made. Is that always perfect in the Board of Regents? No, I can tell you it's not, but so I'm curious. We have a moment to just discuss that. Can you shed some light on your thoughts?
Well, we just spent 2 years talking about a reservation delegation authority change, and that change originated because we found ourselves in a position. Actually, I initiated the discussion 2 years ago because I believed that it was not transparent for the board to find itself in a position where we had a huge buyout for a coach that nobody knew about. And so my concern is, in this particular provision is that, as long as we're not approving large contracts that could actually wait for a board meeting or an emergency board meeting, then I'm okay with it. But the way that I read this here is I think that someone could make and the president has in the past made statements that he needs to be able to act quickly and to hire coaches and things like that. And I think this actually takes authority away from the board in terms of approval of those types of large contracts and other ones, where you could argue that there's a emergency need, or I don't know what it says here, but a need to approve something, and then you get 3 board members together to approve it, and then the rest of us find out about it 5 days later. I just don't think that's very transparent, and it doesn't allow us to exercise our fiduciary responsibility by allowing that to happen.
Mr. Chairman?
I think last comment, and then we're going to be ready to move on.
Just as a practical matter, looking back over the last couple of years, I would tell you that President Kaler and his administration, anytime there seemed to be any issues of magnitude, importance of dollars, he constantly was on the phone and saying, I need to call Regent so-and-so, and someone else going to call Regent so-and-so to keep the board informed. I was always impressed by that. Not finding out 5 days later, but we're going to call the Regents, and the president himself usually did that. There was some occasions would say, well, I'll take 3, Vice Chair McMillan would take 3, and the president. So I believe in your transparency and all. It's just a matter of how it's put in words.
Okay, thank you. We've had a pretty wide range of comments and inputs. We've got a fairly long period of time before this is up for approval, so staff will continue to accept ideas or wordsmithing, but I do want to thank the staff and Chair Rocha for working on this proposed set of changes. Great. Thank you. Let's go to our third item, which is related, transparency of the board and public engagement, and we're going to have staff walk through, sort of frame up this issue, and this is, again, here for discussion.
Great.
Director Steves.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm going to lead this off just briefly and then stop talking finally and let my associate Maggie Flotten walk you through some really interesting information that I think you're going to enjoy. As we start off here, the topic of this presentation is how the board operates in a transparent way and really uses that to engage the public. And as a public governing board, it really should come as no surprise to you that the actions you take, sometimes controversial in nature, are judged really in the court of public opinion. You know that, you hear that, your email inboxes tell you that. And today we're going to talk about ways that the board really strives to enhance its transparency and demonstrate its commitment to public accountability. This is a quote that I found that I thought reflected that pretty well, and these are a couple of folks that do some board consulting work. I've seen at least one of them at an AGB conference, and I think that notion of public accountability is one that uniquely you as a public governing board encounter that many other boards do not, and so it is important to pay attention to it and spend a little bit of time thinking about how the board actually engages in that space. We'll walk around this wheel here. I'll start at the top. Really, the board operates both in spirit and in practice under an umbrella of the open meeting law. The open meeting law requires certain things. It requires that your meetings be noticed, that the location and topic that will be discussed or topics are noticed to the public, and it requires that your meetings be held in public. It also requires that one copy of your materials be located in hard copy available for public inspection. All of those things are things that you do. All of your meetings are noticed, they're public, there's a copy of your docket materials out in the hallway available for public inspection. But what we're going to talk about today is the fact that the board goes far above and beyond those requirements in order to ensure that the public is able to engage with your work, to comment on things that are before you, and give you feedback so that you can be more effective in your roles as elected officials. As we move down and to the right here, it talks about clear and transparent policies. As you know, the board is a governing board. It governs primarily through establishing policies. Right now, the board has 91 policies. And our office works hard to work with you and with the administration to ensure that there is an open and transparent process for establishing, updating, and then housing those policies in a way that the university community and others can see them, interact with them, understand them. And so we try to ensure that there's great clarity in terms of what the board has established as the guidelines and rules by which the university must operate. As we move down, we talk about direct contact with regents. Speaking of the fact that you're an elected official, the public really expects to have access to you. They view you as elected officials that they should be able to reach out to and contact and talk to. And again, this is something that that you well know. We help facilitate that by posting your contact information on our website, by having email accounts established for each of you that go directly to you. We don't see them. We don't interact with them. You manage your own email accounts. And so that's something that I know in a lot of places there's a filtering, or there's a staff member who's replying to things. In the case of your emails, they go directly to you. And also, as you know, the board and regents appear across the state at various events. There have been MinSparks events that the Alumni Association has hosted, or other types of public engagement and speaking opportunities at Rotary clubs and Lions clubs and those types of things. And those are another way that you directly interact with the public and engage. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maggie, and she's going to walk you through the rest of this wheel and then a bunch of other information, really winding up with talking about how we've established a real front door for the public to engage with this board.
Thank you.
Ms. Lawton.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, we'll start at the bottom of this little wheel here and talk about how periodically this board has used public forums to gather feedback on certain topics. A recent example of this is your public forum on human participant research. And historically, you've held public forums to hear comments on the university's annual operating budget. Last year, you elected to move to collect those comments on the annual operating budget through an online form. The opportunity to comment was shared with students, faculty, staff, alumni, and community members through a wide variety of channels, including the university's website and campus and college newsletters. Through this online process, written comments were received and published in your docket materials for the special meeting where you voted on the annual operating budget. Past public forums typically only allowed for up to 20 presenters to address the board at a public meeting, and the online forum resulted in nearly twice as many individuals giving their feedback on the budget. In looking at our colleagues in the Big Ten, about half of the Big Ten colleges have regular opportunities for the public to address the board at their regular meetings. Last summer, the Iowa Board of Regents reinstated this practice and had pretty little interest. They had one individual who signed up to speak at their meeting, but in contrast, the University of Michigan Board of Regents reserves time at each of their meetings and very regularly have members of their faculty and student body who choose to use that opportunity to address their board. Additionally, you've returned to holding one of your regular meetings at a system campus every year, a practice that was abandoned several years ago, primarily due to budgetary constraints. In 2017, you held your March meeting at UMD, and next month you'll be having your regular meeting in Rochester. These meetings provide an opportunity for you to engage with the students, faculty, staff on those system campuses, as well as members of those communities. Moving to the next bubble here, the board operations and action. The way you conduct your business also allows for transparency and accountability to the public. Under your new committee structure, meetings of the finance and operations, mission fulfillment, and governance and policy committees, along with all of your full board meetings, are streamed live on the internet, video recorded, and archived on a YouTube channel. Later, we'll take a closer look at those numbers of individuals who are accessing those videos on our YouTube channel. And your review and action cycle, your practice of reviewing items at one meeting and taking action at a subsequent meeting, allows time for you to gather feedback and hear comments from the public on your action items. Finally, and we'll take a little bit deeper dive into this, the Board of Regents, again, the Board of Regents website is that major communication tool, that window for the public to view items of the board. Every month, thousands of individuals access the board's website. On average, there are 1,764 unique visitors that spend on average 2 minutes and 49 seconds on the website, viewing an average of 3 pages. The website houses information ranging from the university's charter and a historical list of regents to your current committee rosters, the Board of Regents Policy Index, and a repository of meeting materials. This slide outlines the top 10 most visited pages on the website, and this gives you an idea of what information your visitors are looking for. These top 10 pages represent 68% of all the traffic on the Board of Regents website.
Ms. Lawton, Regent McMillan wanted to know if his name was trending up or it'll be off the page within a month or two. He didn't want to ask, but I...
Current polling data, please.
Mr. Chair, Regent McMillan, I'm afraid to say that yes, your hits are increasing, and I'm sure that's correlated to the amount of email in your inbox. It should come as no surprise to you that in addition to reaching out to Chair McMillan directly, that our visitors are coming to the website looking for meeting materials. So again, they're accessing the agendas, dockets, and minutes of your committee meetings and your full board meetings. On the meeting materials page, the first one that you see highlighted there, visitors can access all of those materials from meetings over the last 10 years, and actually additional items or older items are actually archived in the university library's archives as well. So the history of this board is archived at the university online. Later in the presentation, we'll take a closer look at the number of individuals who've accessed these materials for your most recent meetings. And I'll take the opportunity here to note, too, that among the Big Ten, all of our peer institutions post their board meeting agendas online, and the majority of them also post their meeting minutes, but only about half post docket materials or presentations or other materials from their meetings. So that's one of those areas, as Mr. Steves mentioned, where we're going above and beyond what we're required to do. Another common reason individuals visit the website is to learn more about you and to contact you. Again, we talked a little bit about Regent McMillan's individual page here, but on the Meet the Regents page, each of you actually has a photo and a link to a biography where your contact information and a biography is, and this is where they're contacting you directly. This is where your inboxes are filling up. We're getting quite a few hits on that page for individuals looking to contact you directly. And then on the bottom, you'll also see the Contact Us page. We do have a web form on this page that allows visitors to submit a comment through the web page, and it just comes through as an email. There's also a good deal of traffic on the Board of Regents Policy Index, and as Brian mentioned, Mr. Steves mentioned earlier too, that all of the 91 policies are archived and available on the website. So now, as I promised earlier, we'll take a closer look at the number of downloads of meeting materials and the YouTube videos from your last 3 meetings. So this chart shows the total number of agendas, dockets, and meeting minutes downloaded for each of those last 3 meetings. I'll give you some averages. On average, each month, 759 individuals have downloaded the 2J agenda, 299 downloaded the board docket, and 879 committee dockets were downloaded. Again, with the new committee structure, the committee meetings and the full board meetings available on live stream and archived on YouTube. This chart shows the number of views there. As we collect data going forward on this too, you'll probably be able to identify some trends, but for now, Mr. Chair, it appears that the Governance and Policy Committee is unfortunately the least popular.
That was taken before today.
Sorry. Ms. Flotten is working on a plan to create some kind of a viral video opportunity here, but thus far hasn't been implemented.
Mr. Chair, how do you feel about a flash mob at the Governance and Policy Committee?
No.
Again, having these meetings accessible to anyone online just creates a great deal of transparency and accountability to the public. And only 3 of the peer institutions in the Big Ten, Illinois, Penn State, and Wisconsin, are utilizing video streaming or video archived materials of their meetings. So. Finally, this slide highlights the increased engagement with the YouTube channel. Under the old committee structure, only the full board meetings were available to watch online, and there were an average of 273 views every month. Under the new structure, the average jumps to 715. You'll also note the trend line here. As the public becomes more aware of the content that's available on the YouTube channel, the number of views each month will certainly continue to increase. So that concludes our prepared remarks, and we welcome any questions and discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Flott. It's good to hear you present. You've done a nice job.
Thank you.
This is a good presentation that raises some questions and for us to have a discussion around. I'll just say, after being on the board for 9 years, I really do understand the increased transparency with which we're operating. It may not be complete at this point, but technology is certainly providing us ways to increase the visibility of the board and our work, ways that was not available just a few years ago. I think it's important. It's nice to be able to measure what these interactions with the public are. So let's open this up to a broad discussion. I know Regent Swigham's had opinions about this matter, so I'll give him the first bite of the apple.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think about 2 weeks ago, I think I called Chair McMillan regarding the development of our budget in the upcoming year. And I asked Chair McMillan if it would be reasonable, possible, appropriate that we, in addition to our online forum that we held last year, to maybe reach out to citizens a little bit more in a way where we can at least listen to them. Senator, if you remember from our previous position, more damning than not agreeing with somebody was not listening to them. Sometimes you don't agree, but you at least got to be available to listen. And I was just wondering if the board would be interested in, and or the chair specifically, be interested in having a couple of sessions where we could at least be available to listen to the public about the budget as we develop in this next year, which I probably think is coming to us in April and May, meaning we probably want to listen to the public before the president gives us his budget. The president will get 100% of what he recommends. We used to say that about the governor. The governor gets 98.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, the governor gets 95% of what he recommends. The president, in my short term here, has got 100% of what he recommends. So I think it should be previous to a development of a budget. And members, it wouldn't have to be all of us. I did suggest to Chair McMillan that some of us are going to be going up to Duluth in April for on a noon luncheon of some type for a accreditation of our program up there. We could take an hour before or afterwards to listen to Duluthians, and maybe next year we could go out and listen to Crookstonites or some other place. I just think it would be good for us to be available and listen. And Mr. Chairman, I'm just suggesting that we add to our transparency and accountability by doing that in addition to the online forum that we've had last year.
Thank you, Regent Swiggum. It's a good place to start just talking about, because the budget is really our major annual activity. And from when I started on the board, we always had an in-person public hearing. Then it was just last year we went to the online version, and I think we missed something, not having people come and speak to the board. But let's talk about that part first, and we can go touch other areas. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Beeson, and thank you, Regent Swiggum, for the outreach and the suggestions. And Chair Johnson and I changed the process last year, and an ongoing experiment for how do we best capture public input. And I don't know that we got it right last year, and I think there's probably a balance between utilizing online resources and online access, but also, as Regent Swiggum suggesting, maybe we capture some input around this big state that we have a responsibility for helping to govern, or at least the higher education element of it. So I'm open and very interested in that. I think the challenge becomes, how does the administration help us put a budget framework out before the public to comment on, so that we create some structure around what the public's feeding back? And when we do that listening session in June, or maybe it's May, we see the budget and we review it, and then we review and act on it again at the following month, and then it's pretty clear what it is. So I like the idea of backing this up a little, but we need some high-level budget parameters. Perhaps the president's, what he and Mr. Vice President Burnett, Vice President Tonneson come together with. We need something by late March or April that they could see and then react to. But I like it. I like your approach, and be welcoming other board member input here. I also want to note we've been Regent Powell and I have been asking all of you for a sort of mid-year check-in on the new committee structure. Ms. Flatten just mentioned that doing it here, our big committees, has the added benefit of making this open to the public, and that hasn't been available in the past. And I'm not doing a pitch for the structure we have today. It's got warts and flaws and advantages, but one of the advantages that we need to note is we can utilize, and now be we're the fourth member, part of the big school in the Big Ten that's got access to the vast majority of what it is we're dialoguing when we meet in here. So I think that's positive, and that's all I'd note. But more thoughts on public input and how we get it and when we get it. I'm wide open and learning. Thank you, Regent Swigum.
Thank you. I'll remind the members, one concern would be we are put in such a tight period between when we know what our money is from the state and when we have to approve our budget. So going out to the public without knowing what our one of our main drivers of income is, I wonder whether that would really be useful, having a budget meeting with the public that we weren't really able to present detail to. Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Swigum, building on your idea of transparency and going out to the public, just think about this. Let's say that we went out 2 by 2, accompanied by a member of the administration, and maybe had 1 or 2 listening sessions late afternoon, early evening in the various communities. And I think it'd be helpful on the website to say, here's 5 or 6 ideas that we're going to be considering, because we don't give some direction. We'll hear this, well, you know, my grandson was a 2.8 student at Kenyon High School, didn't get into the university, and those are concerns, but you know, we want to be at a higher level. So let's just consider if we did go out, you know, had a day, and we just, you know, randomly teamed up with one of our colleagues, and Mr. Burnett went with Regent Lucas and myself, and we're going to go to wherever, and you know, you do some preparation. I think it'd be kind of interesting to do that, at least an experiment 1 year, see what we might garner from that information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. Could that be combined with the Minnesota Sparks visit?
It could. It could.
Regent Hsu and then Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. I agree with Regent Swigum. I actually like the although we don't react, we have people in here in front of us, they speak to us. If they can't come here, I think the online forums would be appropriate. I mean, I'm reading through concerns on the Child Development Center now. They haven't had a chance to be here personally, but you know, they have thousands of 3,000 people sign a petition and write up, you know, they took serious time writing these little blurbs about their concerns about the closing of the Child Care Center, Child Development Center. And I just think it's very valuable information, because there's very little we knew about, or at least I personally knew about this center. I think Regent Rocha was on the board when they built it back in the 90s, but other than that, I don't know that any of us have ever been there. I've driven by it a number of times, but I've never walked inside. So I think it is important for us to kind of get out and about and see some things and hear from people. I shadowed a student last month, and or before Christmas, and that was a very good experience. I got to sit in on some classes. I sat in while they were doing group work together, and got some tours of some buildings that I've never been in before. So I think it's valuable for us to go out and see what's going on, and also to hear what people are thinking.
Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. I also think that this is a good idea. I support it. I support the commentary on maybe all of us should be involved in some way, maybe traveling as 1 or 2 with a member of the administration and getting to multiple points around the state. I think that's all good. The comment I would offer is that I think as we plan and start to participate in these sessions, they will not be restricted to the budget. I mean, this will be a conversation with the public on anything I think that the public wants to discuss. I think we should expect that, plan for that. So it really becomes a presentation and listening session on the status and the progress and the direction of the university. I think that that's what it would become, and so I think we would just need to plan for very all-encompassing conversations.
Thank you, Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. So I have thoughts about the current conversation and then the entire presentation, so I suppose I'll start with what we're talking about now. I couldn't agree more. I don't think it should just be the budget. If I'm not mistaken, up at Crookston some years ago, I think it was myself, Regent Cohen, and Regent Devine had a panel type interaction with faculty and students, but it was an interaction, and I hope this doesn't come back to bite me, but I actually do not like the format of the 1 hour where folks come in. I think it's inhumane and not humane where we can't interact with them. I think it actually makes it worse, and the tension I don't think actually helps move the comments forward. So I think the more we can do it, and then I also think it's important to recognize that we do a lot of this, right? I'm famous when I go to coffee with President Kaler and Kaufman, and folks are coming and saying hi and speaking, and we do the small campus visits, and so those are forms of feedback. I don't think everyone thinks of it in that way, but we get it in that sense. So formalizing, I think, makes sense, but not just for the budget. So I'm with you on that, Regent Powell. And then just about, I think I do have one question about University of Michigan. They allow, you mentioned every meeting. How often do they meet? Do you know?
The slot.
I would have to go back and look unless you know, Mr. Steves.
Yeah, I don't right offhand.
No,
Mr.
no
Chair.
problem. I'd just be curious to see if they're meeting once a month and taking an hour out of every meeting, or if they only meet 6 times a year and taking however long in that case. But to the presentation as a whole, number one, I noticed that Mission Fulfillment has the most playbacks and live views outside of the almost beating the Board of Regents meetings, and it's not because I go back and watch them all the time.
Track that as well.
So I'm going to give credit to Provost Hanson on that one. But I will say, in an age where there's a certain level of perceived sense that we aren't transparent, the fact that we are going well beyond what open meeting laws would suggest, I hope that there's some media in here today that will write a front page story about how much we go above and beyond to provide transparency for the public, because it's a story, or perhaps Vice President Kramer wants to talk about this in a way that would dispel myths that we are the opposite of transparent. So.
Thank you, Regent Omari. Quick note to staff, because we've got several board members, a couple of them not here, and for our own benefit, if you would be able to summarize what you've described as what our current activities are. There are a lot. And then maybe a separate list from the ideas today that have been floated around, so that the chair and vice chair and administration can pick that up further. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. I really like the idea of piggybacking it whenever we can on the Minnesota Sparks. And I think the Minnesota Spark's been such a success, but this gives some kind of draw. And I think it's a great idea. I also listened to Regent Hsu talk about shadowing a student, and I think I'm going to do that too. I think that sounds very like something we could do if we have time. Sounds important.
Thank you, Regent Lucas. President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. If I can interject in a regential conversation. And I'll be pretty blunt on this comment. The hour listening session that we have held in the past around the budget, I just don't think is useful. I mean, what do you find out? You get 20 people, 18 of whom think that tuition shouldn't go up, and 2 of which are mad about something else. It's a stilted, sterile, one-way conversation that is, I just think, not useful. And on the other hand, I would strongly encourage you to take the time to go out, and I think piggybacking on the Sparks events is a great idea. Go to Rotary clubs, go to Lions clubs. I do a lot of that, and have genuine conversations with our constituents and learn about what they think about the university, what they would like the university to do, and then engage them in the conversation of turning them into allies to help us in the budget process at the other end of University Avenue. That would be very, very helpful. The 1 hour, 3 minutes at a time, red, green, yellow stoplight, I just think is an unnatural and not particularly useful thing to do.
Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully agree with the President and others on that 1 hour. When I first came on the board and we started it, I just didn't know what this exercise was all about, and wanted to engage in people, and I was told to muzzle myself and don't say anything, which is difficult. But now as long as we're talking about governance of the board, I'm going to wade into a different issue, and Regent Swigum will smile when I bring this up, and it's deep weeds certainly, but it's the whole matter about how we are selected in the legislative process. As you recall, Regent Swigum, the legislature, every year there's bills about how regents are selected. I would tell you, my colleagues, that one of the criticisms of the legislature toward us who elect us is, where have you been? Where have you been? You could go over there and camp over there, but they'll say, I haven't seen you for 2 years or 4 years or whatever. I think it'd be interesting to have a little group, a task force of regents, and maybe it's we who are beginning to term out, to come up with some proposals to the legislature of amending or ways that regents are selected. I happen to think it's pretty good in Minnesota comparing to other states, our peer institutions. But this is governance, and perhaps we have something to say. We've learned about the process of how regents are selected. Just a thought I have on this Friday morning, and be interested to hear some of your thoughts in that regard of the regent selection process. Some have introduced bills that the governor would appoint along with confirmation of the Senate. Others have introduced bills like Nebraska's statewide election. Wouldn't that be fun? Or continue on in the way we have done it. There's the Regent Advisory Committee, which has been both good and challenging, but be interested to hear your thoughts. We who sit around here, we're all successful. There are a number of good folks, I would tell you, that have the ability to be regents of the University of Minnesota, for whatever reason, are not sitting here or won't sit here just because of the process. So I'm almost curious about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. I'm not sure we want to sort of get into that conversation. Really, the discussion today is about transparency of the board and public engagement. Well, yeah, but I think we have a lot to think about just within sort of the items that we've been talking about. I would say, I would disagree with the President, though, on the public hearing, and I think that is such a fundamental part of any organization that the public have the right, for whatever worth it is, however staged it might be, or so I do personally like to have open, hear from people. I do like the online as well, and it's only once a year. Okay, we're jumping around here. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. So I would just comment that given the unique way that we are elected in the state of Minnesota by the convention, the joint meeting of the House and Senate, and so that accountability that we have to the legislature, who are they represent the people of Minnesota. I have some heart for Regent Johnson's suggestion that there perhaps ought to be a little more structured engagement, over our term between regents and the legislature, given how we're elected, given that they really are the voice of the people of Minnesota. That is something that we could well include within this conversation on transparency.
Thank you. Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. I'm assuming Regent Johnson thinks it's a great process because he's not going to do it again. I would actually, just around the conversation of transparency, I'd be curious to know if Mr. Steves has any thoughts about the conversation that we're having, particularly with kind of the ways in which we engage with the state of Minnesota. And if not, maybe you have some in June, but I would love to hear your thoughts at some point.
Mr. Steves, you want to wait on and respond at a later point when you digest all this, or any preliminary?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the answer to Regent Omari's previous question is 8 times a year is how many times the University of Michigan meets. Your question about this, I think that this really is one that it just requires ongoing dialogue. My sense is over time boards engage with the public in different ways, and they do that evolves to meet the needs of the time. The fact that we do a lot online right now, partly as a reflection of the culture and society and expectations that you all have as elected officials right now, and so I think it's an ongoing dialogue. I don't think it's have a dialogue, land somewhere, and keep it static. I think it will just continue to be something that we adapt and change with, and so we certainly as staff to the board stand ready to help execute whatever it is that you collectively want to do in order to help broaden and engage the public in your work.
Thank you. This is really it's a board discussion, really not a staff-driven, as you know. Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair Beeson. I really prefer, I like the combination idea, the combination of online and then some personal contact. Having been sat through, I think, 10 or 11 now of the 1-hour sessions, or 10 because we didn't do it last year, the 1-hour sessions, I think, as Regent Omari said, it is extremely frustrating. People have a chance to address the board, 3 minutes. They have the red, green, and yellow, and in the middle of a sentence, they're sort of pulled like a gong show. They're pulled off, and there is no response from the board as people are really expressing some passionate ideas. The board is sitting there because we don't respond. To me, it is unproductive and does not help in any way, shape, or form. So I would be very much in favor of continuing the online and also thinking of, I like the idea of pairs going out, connecting to Sparks, so on. So I think there are better ways to do it. That 1-hour listening session, if we could listen and respond, it would be one thing, but to listen and not respond, I think is very unproductive.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. We have had a couple years ago a series of Rotary visits scheduled, and regents were asked to attend those with staff or faculty, and I know a couple of our colleagues have done that in the past. That tends to get those are a lot of influencers that go to those and cover quite a number of people from around the state, and we might look at that as well. Okay, we've got 3 more minutes. It's a good conversation. Yes, we'll conclude by 9:15. Any wrap-up thoughts? Any takeaways here? Regents, yeah, please.
Mr. Chairman, members, I'm not looking to place more commitment or time work or anything on us. We're volunteers. I'm not trying to place more work on us, but I will have to tell you, last spring when I was here, I was shocked going through May and June to deal with a $4 billion public budget and not have a public hearing and not have the opportunity for citizens to testify. I guess I wasn't smart enough to look ahead to agendas for the previous months, but I was just waiting for the time that we were going to have that hour or 2 hours or 3 hours. You know, I assume that's our own rules that says, our own process that says we can't ask questions and respond, or it's 3 minutes you get gonged or whatever. I imagine we could change that. I would think we have the capability of doing it. And I'm not even saying that it wouldn't be painful, you know. Listening to folks, whether you're at the Rotary Club or getting at the barber shop or their cosmetologist or at church, it's painful sometimes. But you know, I'm thinking that, but I think it's also very, very, very important, Mr. Chairman. And if we could at least think about Chairman McMillan of some way of reaching out to citizens with the development of the budget, and there would be other issues that come up, no doubt. Senator Johnson is correct. Other issues will come up. That's okay. That's good. And I'm not looking at greatly creating our time commitment, but I think Chairman McMillan, it would be important message from our board dealing with a $4 billion public budget to at least have some opportunity that is not just online. Online is good, but folks, it's very impersonal. When you're not looking at somebody in their eyes, you're not looking at somebody with their expression or their passion or being able to interact with them, it's really cold. I find that worse than the hour Representative Cohen sitting here and not being able to respond. I find that much worse, much more demeaning to the public. So I've said my piece. Whatever happens with Chairman McMillan is fine. But I'll participate if you can arrange something.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. We are at Regent Six. Thanks for starting this conversation some months ago and today and bringing that home. We've got some work to do. Let's move to now information items. Mr. Steves, do you want to mention those quickly, and then we'll be done?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll just note that in your docket are several policies that have undergone comprehensive review, and no changes were recommended to those board policies, and so they are simply reported back to you for information purposes, and so that the committee, if desired, could initiate changes if there were something that were missed that the committee wanted to engage on.
On that note, I will call the meeting adjourned and relinquish the gavel to Chair McMillan.
Very good.
Yes.